Now, moving away from politics for a little bit, we need to talk about some pretty important social revolutions that take place during this same era. And these social revolutions are things that do not have a start and an end point the same way that political revolutions do. These are going to be ideas and movements that continue well beyond this era and well into the modern era, well into contemporary times right now, and will continue to be major influencers going forward, even beyond 2018 and this century, right? So the first social revolution that we want to talk about is the abolition movement. And the abolition movement, the movement to end slavery, begins as a kind of unintended consequence of the Enlightenment movement in the 18th century. As the ideas of equality, liberty, fraternity, as the ideas of power governed by the people begin to um, gain popularity, one of the issues that begins to be addressed by this is the standing of slaves and indentured servants and other forms of forced labor. Um, if Locke and Rousseau and Montesquieu and Voltaire and all of these Enlightenment writers are correct, and if Enlightenment ideas are a natural law, the way that the universe wants us to order ourselves, well, then how can one have that belief but still endorse the institution of slavery? If all people are born free with natural rights and they are a blank slate or a tabula rasa, as John Locke says, then why doesn't that extend to people of other races as well? So the abolition movement begins with the Enlightenment movement in the late 18th century. It picks up steam in the 19th century, especially after the Haitian Revolution proves that free blacks are not inferior or inhuman and that they can manage and govern themselves on par with other races, right? So the abolition movement begins to pick up steam in the early 1800s, and it's built by a coalition of kind of disparate factions. There's a famous saying, politics makes strange bedfellows of us all. And what this means is that politics not only has the power to divide, but it also has the power to unite very distinctive groups that, because of their political aims and their political goals, find themselves forced to unite with one another when they are groups that generally really wouldn't interact in normal society beyond the political spectrum, right? So in the abolition movement, you have a coalition of Enlightenment liberals who oppose slavery on philosophical terms, mainly because it violates the idea of natural rights. You also have Northern European and Northern American businessmen who see that forced labor, that slavery, as a threat not only to free labor, but also to their business model. These Northern businessmen tend to be more engaged in manufacturing. And because of that, they tend to require a more highly educated population, or a more highly educated workforce, I should say. So their businesses do not enjoy the economic incentives that slavery offers to more agricultural businesses, plantation businesses. And so to them, this is an unfair economic advantage that plantation economies have over manufacturing economies. So to them, this is a threat to their business model and to just market capitalism in general. And then you also combine that with, especially in the Americas, strong groups of Protestant Christians who see slavery as immoral and as a sin against God. and as a division of this Christian brotherhood that is supposedly supposed to, that is supposed to exist in the Americas. Especially when you consider that many of these slaves that are brought from West Africa to the Americas are forcibly converted to Christianity. So if these people are fellow men and fellow Christians, what right do we have as Christians to hold them in slavery? So the leaders in this abolition movement are generally based in the United States and Great Britain. Um, they have strong numbers, especially in the northern United States and in the manufacturing areas of Great Britain. And they are the strongest voices in this abolition movement. Great Britain actually becomes the main advocate for abolition on a national scale. The British are the first to outlaw slavery in their colonies in 1807. In 1834, they emancipate all existing slaves in their colonies, and they actually use military force to enforce this abolition movement, where they intercept and capture slave ships going back and forth between West Africa and the Americas. Now, this also has an economic motivation for them because this allows them to harm the economic interests of their rivals, like the Spanish and the French, who have not ended slavery and have not emancipated their slaves by this point. But it does provide support for this abolition movement on a national scale, especially when you consider that in the 19th century, the British Navy is the premier naval force on the planet. Um, in other parts of the Americas, like the United States, the Caribbean islands, and Brazil, slavery takes a lot longer. Um, in the United States, the U.S. Civil War is brought to a head by the issue of slavery between the northern and the southern states. In the Caribbean islands and Brazil, the emancipation of slaves essentially has to be forced upon them by economic pressure from their trade partners in Europe and in the United States. Um, Now, the emancipation of slaves and the end of slavery, especially in the Americas, is a dramatic social upheaval, not only in the Americas, but worldwide. This is the end of a social tradition and a business that goes back to the very beginnings of human civilization. Um, Slavery has been embraced by human civilizations, going as far back as classical Egypt, going as far back as hunter gatherer societies. So the idea that no human being should own another human being, although it sounds fundamental and normal for us, is a pretty dramatic change in human thinking, and it does not happen all at once. I mean, this happens much earlier in the Atlantic world than it does in the rest of Eurasia. Usually, only happening in Asian societies in the 20th century. Um, Now, even in the Americas, where emancipation happens much earlier and much more dramatically than in Eurasia, life for those slaves does not change as dramatically as one would think. These freed slaves, with the exception of in Haiti, have very little wealth, no education, no land, and other than agriculture, for the most part, have a very small skill set. So even after emancipation, and when you guys take a push next year, this will be a huge focus. Most of the freed and emancipated slaves are forced into subsistence farming, and usually on the land of their former slave owners. And this becomes a process known as sharecropping. And essentially, what this is, this sharecropping, is a sanctioned form of feudalism. Okay, so I mean, this is essentially feudalism reintroduced into the Americas in the 19th century. Basically, what would happen is these former plantation owners who now can no longer force the slaves to work on their land, rent that land to the slaves, and in return charge them exorbitant taxes. It charged them exorbitant fees for tools, materials, these kinds of things, and basically run them into massive debt where they are no longer legally slaves, but they are economically enslaved. And in the United States in particular, um, this is going to what we know as the founding of Jim Crow, where this type of economic slavery is encouraged by local governments and is supported by local legal systems.